Fasano here from the Engineering Management Institute, and I'm excited to be here at the offices of Bentley Systems. I'm about to pop in and visit with Bob Mankowski. Bob is a civil engineer, and he's also the vice president of Bentley's Digital Cities business unit. I'm going to ask Bob some questions about digital twins for digital cities and how that's going to impact civil engineering as we know it. Let's do it. Anthony Fasano here from the Engineering Management Institute, and I'm excited to be here at the offices of Bentley Systems. I'm here sitting down with Bob Mankowski. Bob is the VP of the Digital Cities business unit here at Bentley, and we're going to get into digital cities, but we're going to talk about some other things related to civil engineering. So, Bob, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thanks, Anthony.
So, Bob, we're definitely going to dive into digital cities, digital twins for digital cities. We had a recent episode about smart cities as well. It's just so much technology going on today that's impacting not just civil engineering, of course, but everyone. But before we do that, your background is in civil engineering.
That's right.
And so I'd love for you to just kind of tell our viewers a little bit about your career journey.
Sure. I got a bachelor's in civil engineering from Drexel University in Philadelphia. And from there, I went on to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. That was my first job out of school. And Drexel's a co-op school, so I had a few opportunities there as well in a construction company. And so when I went out to LA, I worked for the water department, and my first role there was as an inspector on cement lining projects.
Wow.
So I was out in the field. It was really a great experience, and I've often recommended to young civil engineers to get that field experience in the beginning because it makes a big difference in terms of understanding how your work as a designer or as an engineer actually impacts the folks that are responsible for building it, operating it. You get that firsthand experience of like what it really looks like out there in the dirt.
That's great. Now, how did you get from Drexel to Los Angeles? Was there a connection there?
Yeah, there was it was like a career fair at school, and there were a lot of companies interviewing students. And one of the engineers out from LA was an alumni of Drexel and came back and was recruiting on campus. And so I had my first interview on campus, and then they invited me out for a second interview.
Wow.
And yeah, it was really exciting as a young guy from the East Coast to move to LA. And a few of my friends, actually, one of my friends was there with me in LA, and then a couple others worked for Caltrans. So there were quite a few of us that went out to LA.
That's awesome. I mean, I would imagine for a civil engineer, especially young, starting your career, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power must have been a very interesting place to work.
Absolutely. It certainly was. It's one of the most complex, in fact, it might be the largest and most complex municipal water system in the United States. So it was a really great place for someone with a hydraulics and hydrology focus at school to be selected to work there was fantastic. And I worked, like I said, in the field for a few years. And then moved into the office and was responsible for a small team of draftsmen who we were basically creating mainline replacement plans.
Okay.
So upgrading the infrastructure, which of course we can talk about in the context of digital cities.
Sure. Just
the aging infrastructure in the United States, and Los Angeles was no exception there. So we were designing replacements, and that's where I got my first taste of really programming. Okay. So this is sort of how I got into the software industry.
Right.
I was there and I was helping, like I said, we were sort of drafting all these mainline replacements, and I started to write some AutoLisp code in AutoCAD to automate some of the repetitive tasks that the draftsmen had to do.
Oh, interesting.
And so just really making it so it's a bit more efficient for them to do the work that we had to do. And I really I'd always enjoyed programming as a kid.
Right.
I'd gotten in high school I had a programming class, and at Drexel there was one programming class, that was required. But I sort of had the bug,
That's interesting. So that's how you kind of got into the realm of software.
It is.
I guess how you really saw the power of, you could help by writing this code to make things easier in terms of civil engineering. So
and then I started doing stuff, as a hobby. I'm kind of a geek, and so I'd go home and I'd start writing code on my own, to do hydraulic analysis. I wrote little Manning's equation calculators and Hazen-Williams stuff, and then I actually created a Hardy Cross network analysis program on my Mac at home. And just for fun, that was like what I did. That was like my hobby, was programming.
Right, wow.
And then when LA was, I'm from the East Coast, and so when I left the department, only after like 4 years, but during that time I did qualify for and get my professional engineering license.
Right, which is great. Yeah.
And so I've maintained that over the years. But when I was leaving LA, a colleague of mine there said, "Hey, you're from New York, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Connecticut's not that far from New York, is it?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, there's this company called Hasted Methods in Connecticut that does software for urban water system analysis, basically hydraulics and hydrology." I said, "Oh, that sounds like perfect job."
Right, right.
And so I came back east and applied there. I wanted to be a programmer, and they said no. They're like, "No, you're not a good programmer." But since I guess they saw a bit of a passion there, and they said, "But you can join us. Join us as basically an engineering support." So I used to help people that were using the Hasted products.
Okay.
Get the most out of them. I would do, it was a smaller company. It was like 35 people when I joined. So, a little bit of everything. But then really worked hard to try to learn how to be a better programmer and like sort of earn my way into the programming team.
That's great.
And I did, and was sort of product manager / programmer, and then worked my way into more of a full-time programming gig at Hasted, and ultimately Hasted was acquired by Bentley in 2004. So I worked there for 9 years and became the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer at the end there. And then when Bentley acquired us, I make the joke that Bentley already had a CTO, Keith Bentley, the founder.
Right.
So I guess that job was out. And then I started working at Bentley in our geospatial group, and over the years, got more responsibility, different product lines. Civil engineering, I was responsible for our road design and rail design products for a little while. And so that's kind of how I got here. I never would have thought, Anthony, when I was at Drexel, that someday I'd be working in a software company. It wasn't sort of on the horizon, but that's how things happen sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, well, first of all, I remember, and I had mentioned this to Bob earlier, that I really remember the Hasted Methods programs, the Storm CAD, the Culvert Master. I did a lot of stormwater when I was practicing as a civil engineer, and I just remember the programs being extremely helpful when you're dealing with hydrology, all kinds of different inputs and different factors that happen.
That's right.
So that's interesting, and it was, when preparing for this, it was exciting for me to be able to catch up with you on that. But also, from doing all these episodes of the podcast, I've found that civil engineers do very different and interesting things in their career. You're not necessarily limited to always doing design work on civil projects, although that's in itself is an amazing job.
Right.
But there are these other opportunities, which is what I was excited to come and talk to Bob about, because I feel like as a civil engineer, kind of by nature, you're always interested in like the built environment, improving it, and we get to do that on a regular basis. And I can imagine that for you in your position, you have some, potentially really a lot of influence in terms of helping civil engineering projects become more efficient, which, we're going to get into talking a little bit about the digital twins for digital cities. But I would just think as a civil engineer, it's got to be a great feeling to maybe be able to work on some of this technology that can impact.
It is, absolutely. And as a young civil engineer, when I joined Hasted Methods, I was just really interested in the technology itself. Like, I just loved mastering programming and making the computer do stuff, and getting the great results out of it. But I think as I got older, I started to really appreciate how that impacted the broader community. And at Hasted, it was a global company. We sold our software all over the world, and then Bentley, of course, is as well. And it's been really gratifying for me to see how, like, the work that we've done has helped, folks in India have a more reliable and continuous water supply, or rebuild after the tsunami, or, there's just so many of these places. In Brazil, we have a great example of, providing sewage to a population that didn't have sewage collection before, and there was all sorts of environmental problems with that. The lagoon was completely polluted, and they used our software to plan and then execute a sanitary sewage collection system.
Wow, that's awesome.
And it has like real impact on people's daily lives. And it was like I said, as I got older, I began to appreciate that more. When I was a kid, it was more like I was just having fun programming. But anyway.
It's great. It's great. So, all right. So let's talk about digital twins for digital cities. You know, some of our listeners, I'm sure, aren't familiar with the term or not familiar with it at all. So maybe you could just start off with the basics.
Sure. Yeah. So a digital twin, and this isn't specific to the infrastructure industry or cities or anything, but a digital twin is essentially a virtual replica of a system or a process or a product. And in our case, it would be a digital twin of like an infrastructure system or a lot of infrastructure systems together, like in the case of a city. So it's a virtual replica, but it's not just sort of the geometric or physical replica of that in a digital world. It also includes engineering technology, which allows us to model the behavior and the performance of the infrastructure systems, and then use those for predicting, you know, what the performance might be under different circumstances, right? So you can do sort of these sort of scenario plans because you have this virtual replica of it, but it mimics the behavior of the real system. And then a digital twin is often, you know, it's built up from a variety of different sources of data, and you then connect it also with IoT typically, right? So you have some sort of sensors in a water system. It would be a SCADA system.
Okay.
And that way you can get the real-time and historical performance of the system into the digital replica and use that as sort of the boundary conditions or starting conditions of your simulations, for example.
Wow.
Right? So does that make sense?
It makes sense, and it sounds like, I mean, I can just immediately see, you know, tons of benefits for that. I guess one of my questions would be, in terms of establishing the digital twin for a city, what is involved? I guess what's involved in it is, like you said, getting information from different sources and the data. And is it something that ultimately is done through a program of some sort and it's on the computer?
Yeah, So typically, one of the ways that you would start for a digital city and a digital twin of a city is with what we call reality modeling. The idea is that your virtual replica has to reflect the actual reality, the physical reality, otherwise it's not going to be very helpful, right? So one of the things that can be done, and Bentley has some great technology for this, is transforming photos into 3D models.
Oh, wow.
And so it's you know, there's photogrammetry has been around for a long time. This is automated photogrammetry. So just by taking photos from a fixed wing aircraft, like, you know, an airplane or a helicopter, and now of course with drones, you can get lots of images close up to buildings and so forth. You could also take ground photos if you want. Incorporate all this, including LiDAR. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with LiDAR technology. And basically bring all these images and LiDAR together and automatically process that into a very accurate, precise, and visually appealing replica of the city. And we have many examples of this being done around the world. And that's one of the ways to start. So that 3D model of the city becomes sort of the integration point for this other data. It might be GIS data. It might be BIM data, you know, building information models, right? Obviously civil data, right, from road design or land development or whatever you want to bring that stuff in. Connecting in the sensor data from IoT sensors. And having this 3D model is a way of indexing all that information and accessing it in a very intuitive and immersive environment. And we deliver these things, so there's basically, it typically lives on a server or in the cloud, and then you would access it through your browser, either on your desktop or on your tablet or on your phone.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, for example, it would be like a city that would want to build the twin, right? So they might enlist someone to build it for them and use the softwares to build it for them, and then they can whether it's their engineering department or whoever it is, somebody can kind of use it as a model to, like you said, monitor things.
That's right. One of the classic examples that we have is urban planning. So being able to, as an urban planner, look at the changes that are being proposed for the city, bring them into this digital twin environment, and get a better feel for the impact on those. And then a lot of what cities want to do with their digital twin is use it as a platform for engagement with the citizens. And so basically they can create forms to ask citizens questions about how they feel about a proposed project, or do they have? It's
interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Very interactive.
Very interactive, and the citizens, from some of the examples we have, it's a better engagement platform than say the town hall meeting, or the zoning meeting where typically it's only the people opposed to the project come, have the energy to come and sort of speak at those things. This way you get more engagement because it's easy. It's right on their phone. They can just look at the project. They can see what it's all about, and then they can provide their input.
That's great. Now, how far along is this in terms of, are there cities that use this now? Or?
Yes.
It is, so it's in play. And
it is in play, yeah. I think it's, it's past the point of being a vision of having a digital twin of a city to being a reality.
Okay.
With that said, it's not mainstream. It's not like you're going to find every city has a digital twin, but there are some leaders in this area. There are some innovative cities that have embraced the technology and are looking to create a better quality of life for the people that live and work and play in their city.
Sure, that's really interesting. And in fact, we had another episode on our structural engineering channel podcast, which was focused on using drones for bridge inspections.
Yeah.
And the expert that we interviewed, he had done a whole PhD research around it. And there's many benefits to it. Obviously, one of them being time, but also safety. Because you got people hanging off of bridges trying to get to these locations where a drone can get under there and video and things of that nature. So, speaking in terms of civil engineering, it seems like there's tons of benefits for this in terms of monitoring things, like you said, utility systems and, and things of that nature. And I would even think that just a large construction project, right? You could create a digital twin of that project site.
That's right, and that is happening today. There's, for example, with drones, it becomes relatively cheap and quick to do this reality capture, this reality modeling of a construction site on a weekly basis.
Right.
And then you have a whole timeline of change across the project. We also have some technology called Synchro, which is all about 4D construction modeling. So hooking up the structural models, the BIM models to the project schedule, and then being able to see the progression of work and identify potential problems in that progression, again, through a digital twin of the construction process, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with like some of these mega civil engineering projects is that you're talking about like astronomical budgets and things of that nature and impacts to the community, that something like this can be a big time saver.
Absolutely, and big time saver, and then like you mentioned earlier about safety and security, construction projects, of course, these large construction projects where there's a lot of earth movement changes the drainage on a daily basis, and so one of our users is capturing their construction site on a weekly basis and then running our hydraulic analysis capabilities to predict, for a design storm and for a check storm, where am I going to have ponding? Where am I going to have trouble this week? And they can pre-deploy, pumps, or they can take other measures to facilitate that, right? To deal with what could happen if it were to rain.
Like disaster preparedness,
yeah,
essentially.
Yeah, so that's exactly, that touches on a broader topic, what we call resilience, right?
Resilience, yes.
And for cities, it really has two main components to it. One is dealing with sort of the chronic stresses in a city, the aging infrastructure, the urbanization, like the population growth, those sorts of things that are happening, and they're happening all the time, but really stress the infrastructure systems within a city. And then you have these acute shocks. They refer to acute shocks such as like a flood event, a massive storm and flood, or earthquake, or tornado, or hurricane. And so using a digital twin to help plan for that, to assess the risk associated with those types of events, plan for mitigation, right, of those. Say, you look and say, well, if we raise the seawall, half a meter, what does that do? Where does the water go then? Because the water's got to go somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
So if it's not flooding,
it's civil engineers like what we're thinking, right? Like, where's all the water going to go?
Where's it going to go? And so by using a digital twin, that can really help them plan for and mitigate the risks associated with these kinds of stresses and shocks, and become more resilient.
That's great. I mean, it really is. There's so many benefits. And so as civil engineers, like, there's so many impacts to the community based on projects, based on, the environment. And so it's interesting to see that there could be a tool like this that can be so beneficial in different areas. So before we are going to jump into our hot seat segment in a moment, ask Bob a few more questions about his career, which has been kind of an interesting journey. But before we do that, two last questions here, Bob. What are some things, or what is something that really excites you about civil engineering in terms of where we're headed in the future?
Yeah, so I don't think it'll surprise you for me to say that, like, the technology that can be applied to civil engineering, with the advent, so cloud computing is not new anymore. But what is still growing is our access to data, right? And the amount of data that we're producing, and how sensors and all these things are becoming smaller, cheaper, and proliferating around the infrastructure systems. And then there's lots of new techniques related to artificial intelligence and machine learning. I'm sure your listeners have heard about this before. But these things have come together now to a point where we are seeing real benefits from machine learning in the context of civil engineering. Say, for a water system to detect anomalies as they're monitoring their system, artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques can be used to identify anomalies in that flow rate or in that pressure, and identify when perhaps there's a break before it's actually noticed at the surface, right? They can see it in the data, and that's pretty cool. And I think there's a lot of technology that civil engineers are going to be able to apply to the problems that we're facing. And I think for me, that's the most exciting thing, is seeing how civil engineering, because it's an old profession.
Yeah.
And it's relatively risk averse for good reasons. Right. But it's exciting for me to see how they'll take technology, how the profession will uptake of this technology and apply it to the problems we have.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, as a civil engineer, how can you not be excited about all of the potential technologies? And kind of what I was diving into there with Bob before was like, you're kind of like, with Bentley, you're kind of seeing all that on such a broad level, which must be exciting. But at the same time, like you said as well, is that this is an old profession. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how these things are adopted, how they're used, how they're overlaid, because there's all these different technologies as well. And so I think that is going to be an interesting aspect of civil engineering going forward. Last question here in this segment is, what's something maybe that worries you about civil engineering? I mean, I know we're talking a lot about the positives and the technology, but... Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm not the worrying type, first of all. but no, I think that we do have a lot of challenges as a society that civil engineers are going to be faced with tackling, right? So we mentioned aging infrastructure before. I mean, that problem is, every year it gets another year older. Yeah. It's a real challenge, and so what worries me, I guess, is a couple of things. The demand for civil engineers is growing, and I'm not sure that the enrollment and the graduation rates of civil engineers are going to be able to keep up with that demand. So one thing that would worry me is if we ended up with a shortage of qualified and skilled civil engineers, because we do have a lot of challenges, and from climate change and aging infrastructure, urbanization, decarbonization. There's so many things that civil engineers can have an impact on. So we just need to
make sure we have enough.
Make sure we have enough. Make sure we have enough of those young people that want to go into that profession, because I'm afraid that they might not understand how exciting it can be and how impactful their career can be.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear you say that, because there are so many things we can work on. We just need to make sure that we do think about the next kind of generation of civil engineers. And really, like, one thing I'll add to that, which you kind of touched on in the last question, is kind of like one thing that could be a little bit worrisome is I just hope that we can use the technology, adopt it and use it the right way and use the right technologies, because I do feel that sometimes for civil engineers it can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because there are, you have the needs of your client, you want to do the best you can on your project, you have budgets, you have timelines, and then you have technology.
Right.
And so I think it'll just be, and I think that the technology can help us with all the things we're talking about, that we just talked about with the climate change and all this stuff. It's just being able to integrate it and implement it effectively. And so that should be interesting.
Totally agree.
All right, we're going to come back in just a moment here with Bob Mankowski at Bentley Systems, and we're going to put Bob on the civil engineering hot seat. I hope you are enjoying this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast, which is produced by the Engineering Management Institute. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here for more podcast episodes and for all of our Engineering Manager 80/20 Shorts videos that we publish weekly, where we interview successful engineering managers. Now it's time to jump into our Civil Engineering Hot Seat segment. All right, we're back here. We're at Bentley Systems with Bob Mankowski. We talked a lot about digital twins for digital cities and many other things, but now it's time, Bob, to focus a little bit more on your career. We're going to put you on the civil engineering hot seat. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so first question, Bob, are there any routines that you practice on a regular basis, whether it's a work routine, morning, lunchtime, something that just helps you in terms of your success for the day?
Yeah, absolutely. I keep a to-do list.
Okay.
My life has gotten so busy between my personal life and professional life that I find if I don't keep a running list of things I need to accomplish and prioritize them, that things fall between through the cracks.
Yeah, for
sure. Every morning I will take a look at my to-do list, and throughout the day I just keep it open, and it's very simple. I just use a spreadsheet, and I have a list of things that I need to do, and I just color code them by the importance and sort them by their priority.
That's it.
And check that throughout the day and keep adding to it throughout the day, and just keep that as my list.
Spoken like a true engineer, using a spreadsheet. I mean, I think
I use a spreadsheet for everything.
I mean, my wife's a civil engineer as well, and we're always using spreadsheet. Like, we're doing a home renovation project, and of course, first thing we do is we get the spreadsheet out.
Get the spreadsheet out, absolutely.
That's the way it works. All right, next question. Is there a book that either you would recommend to engineers, or a book that you found to be helpful in any of your personal or professional development efforts? Could be one, could be multiple, but is there sometimes something sticks out?
Yeah, it's a little bit specific to me, though, in my career, because I got into software development.
Sure.
So I'm not sure, for civil engineers if this is going to be that helpful, but there was a book that really does stick out in my mind called The Dynamics of Software Development, and it was just a very practical book written by someone who had been through it themselves, and had some just really good advice on how to deal with the typical problems in software development. There's one that I'm reading right now, actually, which is called Objectives and Key Results, OKRs. It's a management technique. Google was a big adopter of this, and there's many other examples. But I think it could apply to any industry in terms of civil engineering. The whole idea is that you want to have a big objective, something a bit aspirational, but then you want to have metrics. And I think this comes back to some of our discussion about data.
Right.
Today it's all about the data and using data to inform your decisions. Some people talk about data-driven decisions.
Yeah.
I don't like to use that term because I think that we don't want the data to, there's a lot of things, intangibles or things that might not be quantifiable that can influence your decision as well.
Sure.
But it should be data informed. You should have data to inform your decisions. And that's what these OKRs are all about, that you have key results there's got to be a number. You got to be able to measure something to see if you're on track and achieving your objective. And if you're not achieving those key results, then you need to reassess your strategy. And so it's another great book, OKRs, which I think can be helpful for everyone.
Yeah, no, I mean, we do at the Engineering Management Institute, we do a lot of management and leadership training for engineering companies, and the first thing we try to do with them is some kind of assessment or baseline, because you don't want to just start giving training to people that don't necessarily need it in that specific area. Right? We're in a world where, really, in my opinion, you should try to do things that are as custom as possible, because you don't want to waste people's time, and we can get the data.
That's right.
Relatively easier. So that's great. Now, just on that first book you mentioned, was that a book that you picked up when you were getting into software to help you with?
It was a long time ago. Yeah, it was actually probably about 20 years ago, I would say. And it was we did a lot of reading, and I was lucky. I had some great mentors and great managers around me. So there was one guy, Darrow Kirkpatrick, who, shout out to Darrow, he was fantastic, and he would read everything, and then he would sort of filter the stuff, right?
Okay.
And so you would know, hey, this is a good book to read, and this,
That's good. I asked because I know a lot of civil engineers from time to time that reach out to us, like they're interested in maybe switching even within the civil range, like a different discipline or something. So. You can always find a resource when you're making a transition that could potentially, help you. And
absolutely.
There's a lot of good information out there. All right. Next question. You've had managers throughout your career, of course, and whether it was at in the water department or in your software life. If you think back to your managers, and maybe a couple of them that might stand out that were considered great managers or really good managers, what were some characteristics or maybe things that they did that kind of made them great?
Yeah, so I've been lucky in that regard. I've had some great people around me. And the term management somewhat implies like organization and structure and management. And that's not how all of them were, right? I had some like that were great, organized administrators, structured, very good at project management and that kind of stuff. And I learned a lot from that. But I was also lucky to be involved with entrepreneurial types as well.
Oh, that's good.
Right? So when I came to work at Hasted Methods, John Hasted was the president, CEO, founder of the company. Got to work directly with him. It was a small company, and it was just a dynamic, enthusiastic, risk taker. And it was great to be around that kind of energy. And then when I came to Bentley has grown a lot by acquisition. And so a lot of the leaders of the company are also entrepreneurs who had founded and ran a company that then ultimately got acquired. So I also had a boss here, Stilly Kamataros. He was my first boss at Bentley. And again, a really dynamic, enthusiastic, passionate guy. And I learned a lot from him.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like one of the key things there was like, they were very energetic and passionate about what they did, and that can certainly rub off on people.
Absolutely, it rubs off on you. It energizes you. There's a lot of hard work. In civil engineering as well as software, you put in a lot of long hours, like you said earlier. You're trying to do the best for your clients, but you got budgets, and there's all sorts of challenges that you're facing. So having that energy, that team and energy, and having a leader who is really a leader. And like I say, neither of those guys were sort of managers in the classic sense, right? They were leaders. They were excellent leaders.
That's great. All right, last question here. Let's just say you were to get into an elevator with a civil engineer, a young civil engineer, and they're thinking about their career ahead of them, and you only have about 30 seconds with them.
Okay.
What career advice would you give him or her?
I said this earlier in the program that I would recommend that they absolutely get some field experience. Don't limit yourself to working in an office, behind a computer, making drawings and designs and calculations and spreadsheets and things. Those are important. But that field experience is where the designs hit the dirt. And there are a lot of challenges out there in construction and in the operations of infrastructure and civil infrastructure. And I would say for a young engineer to get out there and talk to the contractors, talk to the people building the things that you're designing, talk to the people that are operating the stuff that you've designed, and really create a rapport with them. And it'll improve your designs. It'll improve your engineering by having that context and that experience of what it's like out there, getting dirt under your fingernails to actually build these things.
That's great. All right, Bob Mankowski, Vice President of the Digital Cities Business Unit at Bentley Systems. Thank you for coming on the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thank you, Anthony. It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast on YouTube, produced by the Engineering Management Institute. We're always looking for new ways to help engineers become effective managers and leaders. You can view all of our content on our website at engineeringmanagementinstitute.org, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here for our weekly videos. Until next time, please continue to engineer your own success.